everybody, this is Laura with Madam Sew and welcome to my quilting corner. Today I'm going to show you how to make an envelope style throw pillow cover with a French seam on the inside. Now when we make a French seam on the inside, there are multiple seam allowances that we will use within the same project. And I have a great tool that I'm going to feature today from madamsew.com. This is a seam guide ruler. Now what's nice about this is if you don't have the marking lines on the needle plate of your machine, this can help you get a perfect seam every single time. This is actually a 4-in-1 tool. It has measuring lines on two sides so that you can measure small pieces of fabric. It has a 45-degree line to help square up things such as half square triangles. And it also has a 1/4-inch pivot point for marking binding, for example. But the main feature of this seam guide tool is to create a seam guide for anything from 1/8 of an inch all the way up to 2 inches. And how this works is you place this on your machine under your needle and you find the size that you want and you will match up the magnetic piece along the side. And then once you remove the ruler, you will run the fabric along the side of the guide. For my pillow cover today, I'm going to be using a standard size pillow insert. Now this is a 20-inch by 20-inch pillow, and there are other standard sizes as well that are available. But if you have a pillow at home that you're using, just measure that, and we will be adding 1 inch all the way around for our fabric pieces. So my pillow is 20 inches square, so I am going to be cutting my fabric 21 inches square. Once you have the measurements ready for the pillow you're going to use, this envelope style pillow cover comes together basically with 3 pieces. The front square is going to be cut 1 inch larger than your pillow, so mine's 21 inches square. And then you need 2 pieces for the back that are 12 inches by 21 inches for the back envelope part. Now, if you've done piecing ahead of time like I have here, I've put this together with some jelly roll pieces. You can use a solid piece of fabric. If you have done some piecing, you will also want to include a piece for lining on the inside of the pillow, which is also going to be 21 inches square. I just have a simple white here. If you're just using a solid piece of fabric for that, you don't need the lining, but I will show you how to add that in there. If you've done any piecing, it's nice to have the lining to cover up all those seams. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is make a nice finished edge along one of the long sides of each of the rectangles that we have. In order to do that, we just fold it down twice and press it about 1/8 of an inch. And then we're going to sew a line right along there. And in order to do that, we are going to get our nifty little tool out and we are going to measure using this tool with our 1/8 inch seam allowance. So let's take a look at that. The sewing machine that I'm using today does not have any of the markings on the needle plate. So in order to find the right seam allowance, I can use this tool, the seam guide ruler, in order to find the right line. Because I need the 1/8 inch, I'm going to use this hole to put underneath my needle. So you'll lay this flat on your machine and very carefully move the needle down so that it is secure in place where the hole is. Then you will take the magnetic piece here and you will line it up directly with the edge of the ruler. And make sure it's joined right up there. And this is very solid because it's a really strong magnet, so you want to be careful with that. Then as soon as everything is in place and ready to go, you just very carefully lift your needle back up and pull the seam guide ruler out, just like that. And then as soon as you're ready to sew, you will just use this line for the edge of your fabric. Now that we have the seam guide in place, we are ready to sew our 1/8 of an inch. Once you have that sewn, your rectangle has a nice finished look on the top. And I have used this white thread on this blue fabric so that you can see how the workmanship is there and how well that tool works. The next thing you do is the exact same thing with the other rectangle, and then that one will also be ready. You're going to lay your 21-inch square right side facing down. Now, if you're just using one piece of fabric for that square, you do not need to pay attention to this step with the lining, but I'm going to show you how to add the lining if you have done some piecing so you can hide all those seams in your finished project. Now you're going to lay it right side down with the lining on top, and it should match up if they're both 21 inches square. And then you're going to lay your back pieces out, matching up those long edges with the top and with the bottom. And you want that finished seam to overlap right around the center. And then we are just going to pin this. And in order to do the French seam, we will pin this in place and sew 1/4 of an inch around. We're going to remove the magnet first so that we can use the seam guide ruler to find our 1/4 of an inch. There's a nice little lip right here you can use to lift it up and remove it, and set that aside while we get the ruler. So we'll find our 1/4 of an inch hole. We'll place that carefully underneath the needle and depress the needle into that hole, making it nice and secure. Then again, we will take our magnetic piece and place it on the machine right up against that seam guide, and then raise the needle and pull the ruler away. And we're all set to go for our 1/4 inch seam. Next, we're going to clip the corners in here so that when we flip it inside out, it will be a nice crisp corner, and then we will sew one more seam to make sure that that's an internal seam. I have all 4 of my corners clipped now, and we are ready to flip it inside out. Now don't get scared, because this is actually going to look like it's backwards, but it isn't. We're going to flip this just like you would any other pillowcase. And if you want to use your seam presser and corner poker, you can, to get those corners out nice and crisp. Again, I'm using my fantastic little tool I got at Madam So. I use this all the time, just to carefully poke those corners out. You can roll them out a little bit with your fingers, and then use the poker to go the rest of the way to make it nice and square. Gently, gently, gently. And you have your pillow. It looks like it's inside out. Well, it is inside out. So then you have this all set to go. And what we will do now is we're going to take it over to the ironing board and just give it a nice press on all the sides so that that seam is just nice and crisp all the way around. Then we will go back to our sewing machine and sew 1/2 inch all the way around. So we will change our seam guide allowance one more time to that 1/2 inch. And then we will sew our 1/2 inch and flip it inside out. We'll be all set to go. For the final step of the French seam, we are ready to sew that 1/2 inch, and you want to do that back stitch again at the beginning and at the end. After you have that 1/2 inch seam sewn all the way around, your French seam is complete, and we are ready to flip it right side out. This is the really exciting part, because you get to see how the whole thing comes together, and we are all done. So all we have left to do is flip it around and poke those corners out, and we'll get the pillow in there. And look at how darling this turns out. Let me get my corner poker again, just to make sure those are poked out as far as they can, nice and gently. You want to be careful on this part. So you can just stuff it in very carefully and get that pillow in there nice and square. And with that overlap in the back, it should just come together like a nice envelope in the back. And look at how cute that turned out in the front. Isn't that darling? Thank you so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun making this project, and I hope you did as well. Don't forget to visit madamsew.com for the seam guide ruler that I used today, and tons of other sewing and quilting supplies. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Until next time, happy stitching!